Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and a lot of string. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons and he'd fixed an iron ring to the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing. Then he tied Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. When he was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long piece of string, and as it went up and up as he filled it with gas. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the piece of string to the top half of Mrs. Twit's body. Some he tied round her neck, some he tied under her arms, some to her wrists, and even some to her hair. Soon there were 50 coloured balloons floating in the air above Mrs. Twit's head. "Can you feel them stretching you?" asked Mr. Twit. I can, shouted Mrs. Twit. "They're stretching me like mad." He put on another 10 balloons, and the upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now, with her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons. She was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her like that for a couple of days and nights, just to teach her a lesson. In fact, he was just about to leave when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. "Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground?" she gasped. "If those strings around my ankles break, it will be goodbye for me." And that's what gave Mr. Twit a second nasty idea. Mrs. Twit goes ballooning up. "There's enough pull here to take me to the moon," cried Mrs. Twit. "To take you to the moon!" exclaimed Mr. Twit. "What a ghastly thought! We wouldn't want anything like that to happen now. Oh dear me, no." "We most certainly wouldn't," shouted Mrs. Twit. "Put some more string around my ankles, quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe." "Very well, my angel," said Mr. Twit, and with a ghoulish grin on his lips, he knelt down at her feet. He took a knife from his pocket, and with one quick slash, he tied through the string holding Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. She went up like a rocket. "Help!" she screamed. "Save me!" But there was no saving her now. In a few seconds, she was high up in the blue sky and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood below her looking up. "What a pretty sight," he said to himself. "How lovely all those balloons look in the sky. And what a marvellous bit of luck for me. At least now the old hag has gone forever." Mrs. Twit comes ballooning down. Mrs. Twit might have been ugly, but she wasn't stupid. High up in the sky, she had a bright idea. "If I can just get rid of some of these balloons," she said to herself, "I will stop going up and I'll start coming down." she began biting through the strings that held the balloons to her wrists and her arms and her neck and her hair. And every time she bit through a string, the upward pull got less and less as the balloon floated away. When she'd bitten through 20 strings, she stopped going up altogether and just stayed still in the air. She bit through one more string. Very, very slowly, she began to float downwards. It was a calm day. There was no wind at all. And because of this, Mrs. Twit had gone absolutely straight up, was now coming absolutely straight down. As she floated down, Mrs. Twit's petticoat billowed out like a parachute. It was showing off her long knickers. It was a grand sight on such a glorious day, and thousands of birds from miles around came to stare at this extraordinary old woman up in the sky.